Hey guys, it's Doug. Let's talk about web APIs. Today alone, there's 18,000 petabytes of data being transferred over the internet. Most of that uses web APIs. So today we're going to be talking about the three main types of web APIs that you need to know whether you're an entry-level software engineer or your code builds the first time. Stick around until the end of the video to see the fourth type of API that's become popular over the last couple years. The first API we're going to talk about today is the SOAP API. That stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. This type of API became popular in 1998. It's no longer considered the sexy approach for transferring data. However, it stood the test of time and it's still considered the gold standard by a handful of industries. SOAP requests are regularly composed of XML and can exchange data over a variety of protocols not limited to HTTP, SMTP, or TCP. So what does a SOAP message look like? A SOAP message is made out of four main components. The first part is the envelope. As the name suggests, the envelope is a set of XSL tags that surrounds the entire message. Next is the header. This is an optional part of the message that usually contains metadata, similar to the type of data that you'd put in HTTP headers, but this is totally optional. The main part of a SOAP message is called the body. This is the main part of the message that's transmitted and contains all the data that you plan on sending to the service. SOAP messages are put together using an XML file called a WSDL. In short, the web service description language is used to create SOAP messages. It defines which data and fields can even exist inside the body when you're transferring data back and forth. Because of the strict contract between the WSDL and the body of a SOAP message, payment processors and banks often use SOAP protocols in order to transfer data back and forth because it's considered very secure, as no additional data can be embedded in the message when it's sent and received. You might be asking yourself, where is SOAP used today anyway? Some industries require security over flexibility in their APIs. A great example of this would be PayPal. Many of the interactions done with PayPal's APIs are done through SOAP APIs. They do this because it helps make sure that only the data that they want to be inside the payload actually get to their servers, and it makes a very clean request and response structure. The next API we're going to talk about is called the REST API. That stands for Representational State Transfer. Over the last decades, the REST architecture has become one of the most popular ways for new APIs to be developed. When interacting with a REST API, the data access concepts revolve around the idea of a resource that's expressed through a URL. That may appear as an HTTP request. Although it appears similar, REST and HTTP are not the same thing. To be considered a true REST API, the API has to conform to a few guideline constraints. RESTful APIs do not necessarily require XML or JSON. However, they're two of the most common formats used today, partly because they're easily consumed by users and can be cached by browsers. An example of URLs which represent a user resource and its configuration resource might look like this. Notice that the resource path contains only nouns. The verb is implied by the type of request. Is an example where you're requesting the user and configuration information by passing an ID. Unlike SOAP messages, the data used in RESTful APIs doesn't have a strict format, but the API you're using might dictate a certain format depending how they want their data to be represented. Most often, REST APIs are used for CRUD operations. So who uses REST APIs? Most projects, whether they're enterprise or a personal project, contain some sort of REST API for interacting with their backend. For a list of some of the most used public APIs, Rapid API put together a list for 2021. If you're interested in seeing an example of how to put together a REST API using Java and Spring Boot, take a look in the description and I'll put a link down there. The third type of API is an RPC API. RPC stands for Remote Procedure Call. This type of client-server interaction has been around since the 1970s, but the name didn't actually get coined until 1981. If you're just looking at the data being transferred by an API, it would be really easy to confuse a REST API and an RPC API. Unlike a REST API, an RPC API is verb-focused versus noun-focused. This means that the client is usually requesting some type of action be taken instead of just being delivered a particular object or a particular resource. As an example, an RPC API to interact with geolocation data might expose various ways to find data. The URL in this example returns a result set within the radius of miles and a set of coordinates. RPC APIs are tailored towards the project, unlike REST APIs, which are a bit more generic. Because of this, you'll see that many companies or projects that use REST APIs also have some type of RPC implementation as well for specific actions other than CRUD type operations. If you reference the list of APIs I mentioned during the REST section, you'll see that most of those also have RPC URLs available. Right, if you've made it this far in the video, you deserve to know what the fourth bonus type of API is. And this type of API is called a GraphQL API. GraphQL combines the concepts of a graph data source with straightforward concepts of a query language. The first stable build of GraphQL was published by Facebook in 2018. GraphQL is not necessarily a true type of API architecture, but its design allows it to sit in front of existing APIs as a proxy or a facade. The core concept of a GraphQL API is to allow the client, like a website or a mobile app, to not only define the structure of the data, but the content of the data as well, instead of having the backend API dictate what that looks like. This means that if you have really big data objects in the backend, but you only need to show a couple of fields on the front end, there's no reason that you have to create these lightweight objects that proxy them on the backend, and there's no reason for you to pull that entire big data structure into your UI just to show 2 or 3 fields. One of the best features of GraphQL is that its implementation allows the API to aggregate data from underlying REST, RPC, or SOAP APIs. The net result is that a single response comes back to the client instead of one response from each of these different APIs that needs to then be molded into a single one. If you made it this far, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. Also, check out this other video that I made on 3-tier architectures. Thanks again, happy coding, and I'll see you in the next one.